Alright, here's O'Brien after a session, during another session of brainwashing. Power over matter, external reality as you would call it, is not important. Already our control over matter is absolute. For a moment Winston ignored the dial. But how can you control matter? He burst out. You don't even control the climate or the law of gravity. And there's disease, there's pain, death. O'Brien silenced him by a movement of the hand. We control matter because we control the mind. Reality is inside the skull. You will learn by degrees, Winston. There is nothing that we could not do. Invisibility, levitation, anything. I could float off this floor like a soap bubble if I wished to. I do not wish to because the party does not wish it. You must get rid of those 19th century ideas about the laws of nature. We make the laws of nature. But you do not. You are not even masters of the planet. What about Eurasia and East Asia? You have not conquered them yet. Unimportant. We shall conquer them when it suits us. And if we did not, what difference would it make? We can shut them out of existence. Oceania is the world. Oceania being England. But the world itself is only a speck of dust, says Winston. And man is tiny, helpless. How long has he been in existence? For millions of years the earth was uninhabited. Nonsense, said O'Brien. The earth is as old as we are, no older. How could it be older? Nothing exists through human, except through human consciousness. Now I want to interrupt there for a second. That sounds incredibly bizarre, as if, that's like postmodernism run amok. But there was actually a man, I forget who it was one of those crazy French postmodernists. He actually wrote an article in some French magazine in 1989. Apparently there was some theory that King Tut had died of, what was it? It was tuberculosis, because they found some bacterium or something, whatever. But anyway, this French postmodernist said there is no way that he could have died from tuberculosis because the bacterium that causes it was only discovered a century ago. And how could he said, well, just as King Tut could not have died from a gunshot wound, and he could not have died from a heart attack as a result of a stock market crash, he could not have died from a bacterium that had not been discovered yet. I mean, really, you can't make this kind of stuff up. I mean, there really are people who advocate this kind of thing. So moving on, Winston says, but the rocks are full of the bones of extinct animals, mammoths and mastodons and enormous reptiles which lived here long before man was ever heard of. Have you seen those bones, Winston? Of course not. 19th century biologists invented them. Before man there was nothing. After man, if he could come to an end, there would be nothing. Outside man, there is nothing. But the whole universe is outside us. Look at the stars. Some of them are 1,000,000 light years away. They are out of our reach forever. What of the stars? Said O'Brien indifferently. They are bits of fire a few kilometers away. We could reach them if we wanted to, or we could blot them out. The earth is the center of the universe. The sun and the stars go around it. And O'Brien goes on, for certain purposes, of course, that is not true. When we navigate the ocean or when we predict an eclipse, we often find it convenient to assume that the earth goes around the sun and that the stars are millions upon millions of kilometers away. But what of it? Do you suppose that it is beyond us to produce a dual system of astronomy? The stars can be near or distant, according to what we need of them. Do you suppose our mathematicians are unequal to that? Have you forgotten doublethink? So this is phenomenology. Is this phenomenology? Let's see. I forget the name of the philosophy, but that's a certain branch of philosophy in a nutshell. If we need this theory, we can use this one. If we need another theory, we can use that one. None of it's really true, but we just use things as maps to help us get along in the world. All right, here's another big one. This is getting more toward the end. Here's the last one. Okay, this is after prolonged brainwashing sessions. This is months into it probably. And after the torture, after being bamboozled with these crazy postmodern ideas, after having all of his values, all of his beliefs totally shaken, he starts rationalizing essentially he starts believing whatever he needs to believe in order to get the torture to stop. And so he starts rationalizing here. He starts thinking, anything could be true. The so-called laws of nature were nonsense. The law of gravity was nonsense. If I wished, O'Brien had said, I could float off this floor like a soap bubble. Winston worked it out. If he thinks, he floats off the floor. And if I simultaneously think I see him do it, then the thing happens. Suddenly, like a lump of submerged wreckage breaking the surface of water, the thought bursts into his mind, it doesn't really happen. We imagine it. It is hallucination. He pushed the thought under instantly. The fallacy was obvious. It presupposed that somewhere or other, outside oneself, there was a real world where real things happened. But how could there be such a world? What knowledge have we of anything save through our own minds? All happenings are in the mind. Whatever happens in all minds truly happens. He set to work to exercise himself in crime stop. Crime stop being the willful stopping of thought crime. Thought crime being thoughts that are outlawed by the state. So crime stop is the stopping of thought crime. He presented himself with propositions, such as, the party says that the earth is flat, or the party says that ice is heavier than water, and trained himself in not seeing or not understanding the arguments that contradicted them. It was not easy. It needed great powers of reasoning and improvisation. The arithmetical problems raised, for example, by such a statement as 2 and 2 make 5, were beyond his intellectual grasp. It needed a sort of athleticism of mind, an agility at one moment to make the most delicate use of logic, and at the next to be unconscious of the crudest logical errors. Stupidity was as necessary as intelligence, and as difficult to attain. So there it is. The big problem with this book, though, is that Winston does not have any answers to postmodernism. And I don't know about anyone else's English teachers, but my English teacher sure as hell didn't have any answers to O'Brien's arguments here. So I would suspect that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of high school students every year are reading this book, and because they don't hear any answers to O'Brien's sophistry here, essentially they are being brainwashed by O'Brien by reading this book because they don't have any arguments against them. Oftentimes I would suspect that the student is left believing that there is no rational argument against this kind of totalitarianism. It's not the fault of the book. I mean, it's pretty clear as an adult and as an objectivist reading this book that Orwell put these ideas in this book assuming that his audience would know that these ideas are preposterous. It's not his fault. The problem is that the English teachers don't have any answers to these questions because, I mean, they're English teachers. I mean, philosophy is a pretty specialized topic, but the problem is that you put these arguments in front of 16-year-olds or 15 or 17-year-olds, and basically this is the first philosophy they get a hold of, and they start thinking, wow, reality is just a figment of my imagination. God, why am I working so hard in school, and what does this mean for all the things that are important to me? And well, I guess there's no reason not to succumb to brainwashing because it's all the same. It's whatever I believe happens to be true, so so people just throw up their hands. So anyway, there it is, Postmodernism in George Orwell. I'm going to put up a link to an article by one of my favorite authors, Theodore Dalrymple. He wrote a piece on dystopias, including 1984 and what's the other one? Brave New World. So some very interesting things. If you haven't read this since high school, I highly recommend it. There's other stuff in it besides just postmodernism, but I thought I would give a heads up on this one.